It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to all of you for taking the trouble to come this evening. When I'm talking, if I start to lose the people at the back, please raise your hands and just shout out that you can't hear me, so I don't want to lose you all midway. Before I start, can I just reiterate the call to arms? If you can't help WNPS get involved, it's worthwhile cause, and those of you who've got the skills, you'll find that by contributing your skills, you also grow. It's a great way to grow yourself, get involved in an illustrious organization like the WNPS. So I'm going to be talking about the endemic birth of Sri Lanka today, as you all already be aware. In terms of the structure, I'm just going to start with a few announcements, go to the physical context. Then I'm going to talk about the research work done by other scientists, and then we'll look at where can you see the endemics, and then let's go and search for some of the endemic birds. So in terms of announcements, one of the first things I want to point out is that although it's, I'm seen as the guy who writes and photographs, it's a big team effort, and a big thank you to all the corporates who support me. The other thing I want to say is that the books I do, it's not really about showcasing my photography, it's about building capacity, and so we're getting other people interested in wildlife. And I'm very happy to use images from other photographers. There's a bit of information on a website link, or take my email down, gehan.dissilva.w@gmail.com, and I'll send you some guidelines on what you need to do to get your images into print. I'm going to start with the physical context because I think very few people probably realize how lucky we are that Sri Lanka is as rich as it is, because it is an unbelievable accident of nature that in a way we've ended up so rich. And I've been talking about why Sri Lanka is super rich for wildlife, because although lots of other destinations may have bigger rainforests with more species, the combination, the big game, the endemicity, the infrastructure, when you take all of that into account, very few destinations have what Sri Lanka has. So we all know where Sri Lanka is, and we assume that if you're a tropical island, you're going to be lush and beautiful. But if you look at the map, and if you go west on the same latitude, you come to the Horn of Africa, and you can see that it's very dry and barren. So just where you are, being near the equator itself, doesn't make you a lush tropical island. And there are islands of South America, off the northern coast of South America, like Aruba, which are very dry and very species poor. So we all know where Sri Lanka sits. The reason we have this combination is because we are in the rain shadow of the Western Ghats. So Sri Lanka and India is part of this tectonic plate. We travel from near the South Pole, and it over sort of 150 to 200 million years, it's moved to present position. And the two have traveled up in tandem, and they probably stayed that kind of distance apart. So now when you go along the airport road to the airport, and if you can keep going north, you go to the wet zone, and then you come to Putlanchila, which is very dry. And that's because the Western Ghats is creating a rain shadow, and it's creating a dry zone. So as the rain comes over the Western Ghats, that bit that comes over Sri Lanka is dry. The other bit is not dry, and because it's a lot of rain. If Sri Lanka was another 150 to 200 kilometers further north, the whole country would have looked like Manna. If it was maybe 200 kilometers further down, the whole country may have looked like Singaraja. So we would have either had a huge amount of biodiversity, lots of endemics, or would have been entirely dry zone. And maybe dry zone like Yala, which supports large mammals, or very arid dry zone like Manna, which doesn't. Okay, but now we have the ideal combination. So Sri Lanka was actually made for wildlife tourism. So if there is a god, there's an ecotourism god, that ecotourism god said, we can make Sri Lanka rich in every aspect of wildlife tourism, the big game, the whales, as well as the endemic stuff. Then of course you've got this combination of the Dagi, like monsoons, mountainous coast, all of that contributes. So we all know that Sri Lanka has these diverse habitats, and I've just gone through to explain what creates that. So physical topography is a part, and we take it for granted. But people who travel here, they're just amazed that in this small island, you have the scale of things which are on a continental scale. And a lot of foreign people I travel to just can't believe that we could have so much packed into such a tiny island. Because the geology is awesome, the landscapes are incredible, and the sheer diversity of habitats is really, really broad. One of the few places that has such a broad diversity of habitats is actually Britain, again influenced by the underlying geology, because Britain is very rich in the underlying geology, and that influences the kind of plants that grow and the kind of animals that can be found there. We may also not realize that in South Asia we have some of the richest rainforests. So all of this sets the scene. But interestingly, there have been papers published which suggest that the endemics found in Sri Lanka, and if you compare them with the endemics found in the Western Ghats, they have been separate for millions and millions of years. So our wet zone is like an island surrounded by this dry zone sea, and the Western Ghats is separated by this hostile terrain. And it seems like for millions and millions of years, these have been separate. They have all evolved their own species radiations. So here I've summarized some of the key factors, the physical factors, the evolution factors, the human factors. I don't want to boil by going into too much of detail. I've been told I can only keep out here for 3 hours, so I'll just keep racing through the slides. And pay attention, because at the end there's a test as well. If you don't get a 75% pass mark, you can't leave the room. So with this chart, what I'm trying to say is, if you compare Sri Lanka with other large tropical islands, in terms of the species per unit area, how do we compare? So we don't need to go too much into the maths. Now, I'm not cheating. I'm not comparing Sri Lanka with Britain or Iceland or Greenland or something in a high latitude, because we all know that when you're close to the tropics, you have more species. I'm comparing Sri Lanka with Madagascar, New Guinea, and Borneo. And islands like Borneo, they are all like, well, at least once they were all entirely rainforest, so they're very species rich. But if you look at the comparative scale, the red line is Sri Lanka. So you can see how Sri Lanka is way above those other large tropical islands, and those other large tropical islands are 10 times the size of Sri Lanka. So you would expect them to have more species per unit area. But surprisingly, Sri Lanka, beats them all. I mentioned that the Western Ghats and the wet zone of Sri Lanka have been separated for a long time, and that's why we have all these unique species, what biologists call clades. So the land bridge is not really what contributed to the species diversity in terms of the endemics, but when the sea levels went down, we had this land bridge connection with India, and that would have contributed to the dry zone wildlife we see. So things like the elephants and the leopards, it certainly would have been helped by the land bridge. But the endemics in the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka would have remained separate. So no one exactly knows what the physical conditions were during those last 150 million years. or 200 million years that has influenced what we have in the country. I guess over time, scientists will find better and better ways of looking at it. But everything the scientists come up with continues to reinforce that Sri Lanka is actually very special. And this is also being translated into foreign exchange from wildlife tourism. Sri Lanka is also a very good place to learn your birds. I'm not going to baffle you all with going to too many numbers, but if you look at the top table, so all the bird species in the world, about 10,000, are broken up into orders. And in broad brush terms, we have about 61% of all the orders of birds that are found in the world. So we are missing some. So there are some orders of birds found only in New Guinea and some only found in the Americas, so we don't have them. But you can see that when you become a bird watcher in Sri Lanka at a higher taxonomic level, you start to become very familiar with birds. If you look at families, Sri Lanka has 34%, about a third of all the birds. There is something a little strange about Sri Lanka though. In the world, birds which are called passerines, these are perching birds like the house sparrow, they are about 60% of the birds, but we only have 30%. And I don't know why. I'm going to now go through some of the scientific work, and I hope the non-scientists here or the people who are not into popular science don't get too bored, but after that we'll just do a more popular excursion looking at the different kinds of endemic birds we have. A lot of interesting work has been done by the field ornithologist group of Sri Lanka, led by Professor Sarat Kottagama, where they studied this thing called the bird wave, or mixed species feeding flocks. So I call what happens in Singaraja the Singaraja bird wave. And the bird wave sort of behaves almost like a big superorganism. They sort of comb through the forest. Each species has a role to play, and they all occupy different physical strata, and it works as a very efficient machine. And their objective is to feed and to have protection. So more pairs of eyes means more people looking out, or more animals looking out for predators. And when birds at the top disturb things and caterpillars fall at the bottom, birds at the bottom can feed on them. Now, the work done by people like Ibn Goodell, who did his PhD supervisor, Professor Kottagama, has recorded 59 species. A flock is on an average 12 species. An average flock size is 41. A lot of really good quality research has been published in things like the Folktale, which is the journal of the Oriental Bird Club. And the people here who are very, very keen on their birds might well want to consider becoming a member of the Oriental Bird Club as well, because you get their scientific journal and twice a year you get a popular bulletin. What's interesting about the bird wave is that it's the longest continuous study of bird waves anywhere in the world. It's the largest, and it's the most stable. Any of you who've been bird watching abroad could have encountered bird waves, and you find that they just travel at lightning speed. So in the Malaysian rainforest, sometimes you get a bird wave, the birds come through, and all of a sudden there's lots of birds, and you don't even know where to look because it's all happening so fast, and they have gone through. Whereas the Singaraja bird wave, it moves very slowly. Sometimes you could be in one place and watch them for an hour, so it gives you plenty of time to see the different kinds of birds. So this is the Ibn Goodell you see there with Professor Kottagama, and I've listed a lot of detail which I'm not really going to go through in this talk. A lot of the text is there so that when the PowerPoint presentation is converted to a PDF, people can download it and read it at leisure. But a lot of scientific papers have been published studying this phenomenon, and this then translates into more popular articles like the one here, which I published in a Finnish magazine called Alula, which then translates into people coming to Sri Lanka to bird watch. So that brings money into the economy, it provides employment to the local people. So the science then translates into commerce, and that means that the local communities find an economic reason why they should, rather than going and planting tea and encroaching on the forest, why they can conserve the forest and the birds because it's providing livelihoods. Sri Lanka is not the only place where you can see some fantastic bird growth. This is at a place in Malaysia called the Ceylon Highland Resort. Early morning at dawn you go to the car park and you have all these fantastic birds coming from the forest and they feed. But it's very short-lived, and as day breaks they're gone, and it's quite difficult for photographers to get good pictures as well. Which is why again this English bird wave is so interesting. And the bird watchers love it. Interesting things that come from the studies. So you find that Ceylon Crested Drongo acts as the CEO of the flock. It makes a special flock gathering call that brings the birds together. It acts as a trigger and it's supported by a management committee. The Ceylon, the Rufous Babblers or the Orange-billed Babblers, they're like key constituents and they provide a cohesive structure. But the Drongo is also a bit of a naughty boy. He tries to steal food from other birds by mimicking raptors and scaring them, something called chapter parasitism. And it is sort of mindful of which alarm call to mimic to get the desired result. This is the bird that you actually listen out for to locate flocks. So they're like the yellow-billed babblers you see in the garden. They keep a constant chatter, so like a bunch of school children. And once you locate these, then you know that you can start looking out for the other flock members. So high up in the canopy is the red-faced malkoha, which is a very endangered endemic, now only confined to places like Moropitia and Singaraja. But when Captain Vincent Lake wrote his book on the history of the birds of Ceylon in the 1800s, red-faced malkoha could be seen in Sri Javanapura. So that shows how much habitat has been lost. But also about just over 100 plus years ago, I've heard people saying that in the Boreal area sometimes you would even get wild elephants. So it's quite believable if something like the red-faced malkoha was found, you would have had enough forest cover for the large animals to be present as well. Because this bird is only found where you have large tracts of forest left. It is also found in the dry zone. The other small bird you see, the babbler, is an ash-headed laughing thrush. Again, an endangered endemic, found only in, we call it rainforest. This is a bird of the sort of the ground level, or sometimes it goes to the mid-level. And then there's this other bird, the scimitar babbler, which is also an endemic, which has this beautiful bubbling call. And actually, really, if you're getting into endemic birds, you need the calls because they're so rich and varied. The scimitar babbler, it's a bit like a conversation with my wife. The female always has the last word. The male does this lovely, bubbling call, and then the female ends with that click at the end. She always has to finish the sequence. Then there are other interesting birds like the blue magpie, and in the 2000s, somewhere in the sort of mid-2000s, 2005 or something like that, Chamindra Ratnayaka, another one of Ferguson member, and supervised by Professor Kuttagama and his colleagues, did a PhD on blue magpies, on this gorgeous endemic bird. I mean, it looks like you grew a bird and told a child to color it, and the child sort of with the red crown and red beak and red legs and chocolate brown head and blue colored body. And one of the interesting things that came out of this was that they are social breeders, and jackals do the same.